Our channel shares stories that actually happened. Do you know or have experienced any shocking stories? We also tell the stories of our subscribers. Leave them in the comments so we can share them with the world. We want to hear from you. She never imagined that her life would change so drastically, so quickly. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind of rain that felt like it was pouring down on her from all directions, a metaphor for the emotional storm she was facing. At 20 years old, she found herself pregnant and completely alone. The only person who should have been there, her boyfriend, rejected her the moment he found out. But that pain, as deep as it was, wasn't the worst she would experience that day. The real hurt came from her own parents. The people who were supposed to love her unconditionally, her mother and father, turned their backs on her in the most painful way possible. Her mother, the one who always swore to protect her, and her father, who she had always respected and looked up to, spoke to her in a way she had never imagined. "You've embarrassed us," her father said. "You can't stay here anymore. You need to leave." Those words hit her like a physical blow. She tried to explain, to tell them that she had nowhere to go, that she didn't know what to do or how she was supposed to manage on her own. But it didn't matter. They were already done with her. The door slammed shut in her face, and she was left standing there in the pouring rain, her body shaking, her heart shattering. She couldn't believe what had just happened. How could they do this to her? She had always been a good daughter, always tried to make them proud, but now in their eyes, she was nothing more than a mistake. She stood there, alone in the cold, with no home to return to, no one to turn to. For the first time in her life, she felt completely abandoned. The pain of the rejection stung, but what hurt even more was the betrayal from the people who should have been there for her no matter what. The sound of the rain hitting the ground beneath her feet was deafening, but inside she couldn't hear anything except the echo of her father's harsh words. "You've embarrassed us." It repeated over and over in her mind. What was she supposed to do now? Where could she go? Her whole life had been turned upside down in the span of just a few minutes. She walked away from the house, unsure of where to go, or even if she wanted to go anywhere. Everything she thought she knew about love, about family, was suddenly called into question. She felt completely lost. She didn't know what to do, where to turn. But as she walked down the street, feeling the weight of the rain on her shoulders, she realized something important. She wasn't going to give up. No matter what, she couldn't. Not for herself, and not for the child growing inside her. She had no choice but to keep moving forward, even though she didn't know how. The weight of the rejection was almost too much to bear, but she knew that staying in the same place, dwelling in the pain of that moment, wouldn't help her. She had no home, no family, and nowhere to go. But somehow, she managed to drag herself forward. She remembered that there was a small church a few blocks away, one she used to pass by when she was younger. Maybe she could find some refuge there, just for the night. So, with her heart heavy and her legs trembling, she began walking. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and her clothes, soaked through, clung to her skin. It felt like the world was mocking her, like the rain was just another reminder of her misery. Each step she took felt like a small battle. She was carrying more than just the weight of her soaked clothes. She was carrying the heartbreak of losing her parents, the shame of being kicked out, and the fear of what would come next. But through it all, she kept moving. She didn't know how she was going to get through this. She didn't even know if she had the strength to keep going. But somehow, her body kept moving forward, one step at a time. When she finally reached the church, it was closed, the doors locked and the lights off. She stood there for a moment, staring at the building, feeling like she had just walked to the end of the earth, only to find a dead end. What now? She felt a pang of desperation, but then, as if on cue, a man approached her. He was middle-aged, dressed in a coat and carrying an umbrella. He looked at her with concern in his eyes, and for a split second, she almost broke down in front of him. She didn't want to. She didn't want to appear weak, but the exhaustion and the overwhelming emotions made it so hard to hold it together. She tried to speak, but her throat closed up. The man noticed her distress and asked if she needed help. She hesitated for a moment before nodding, the words catching in her throat. She didn't know who he was or why he stopped, but something in him made her feel like, maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone. The man introduced himself as Andres. He offered her his umbrella and insisted on walking her to a small restaurant nearby. "It's not much," he said, "but I can give you a warm place to stay for the night." She wanted to refuse. She didn't want to impose on a stranger, but the truth was she had nowhere else to go. And at that moment, the idea of warmth and shelter was too tempting to ignore. As they walked together in the rain, the man never asked about her story. He didn't judge her or make her feel like she had to explain herself. He simply offered kindness when she needed it most, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel a small glimmer of hope. Maybe things wouldn't be as bad as they seemed. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to start over, even if she had to do it alone. The small restaurant Andres led her to wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like the safest place she had been all day. The warm, comforting scent of food in the air made her realize just how cold and empty she had been feeling, physically and emotionally. As soon as they entered, Andres told the owner, an older woman named Teresa, that he had brought someone in need of a place to rest. Teresa didn't hesitate for a second. She immediately offered her a seat and brought over a cup of hot tea. Elena could hardly believe the kindness they were showing her, a complete stranger. It was so different from what she had just experienced hours before with her parents, who had shown nothing but disdain. For a brief moment, the warmth of the tea and the hospitality of the woman made her feel like maybe everything would be okay. But deep down, she knew things wouldn't be easy. She could feel the weight of her situation pressing down on her, the uncertainty of what would happen tomorrow, the fear of facing her family again, or even worse, never seeing them again. She didn't know where her life was headed, but at least, for that night, she had a roof over her head and someone who cared enough to offer help without expecting anything in return. Teresa, noticing Elena's exhausted and tear-streaked face, gave her a soft smile and asked if she wanted to talk. Elena shook her head. She couldn't find the words, and honestly, she wasn't ready to share her pain with anyone. But she was grateful for the kindness, the compassion in Teresa's eyes. It wasn't pity, it was humanity. And for the first time in hours, Elena felt like she wasn't completely invisible. She wasn't entirely sure what tomorrow would bring, but she knew that, in this moment, she wasn't entirely alone. The warmth of the tea spread through her, and though her heart was still heavy, she began to feel a tiny sense of peace settle over her. Perhaps she wasn't as abandoned as she had thought. Maybe there was still kindness left in the world, and maybe she could find a way to rebuild her life even if it meant starting completely from scratch. The night passed in a blur. Elena barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts of everything that had happened. The warmth of the restaurant and Teresa's kindness couldn't erase the harsh words of her parents. The guilt and the anger were still there, lingering in the back of her mind, like a shadow she couldn't shake off. She kept thinking about her parents, about what they had said and the way they had treated her. She had always done her best to make them proud, always tried to be the daughter they wanted, but none of that mattered when she needed them most. In the midst of her reflection, Teresa quietly offered her a place to stay for the night, but Elena hesitated. She wasn't sure if she could accept any more charity. It felt wrong to depend on a stranger. But Teresa's gentle insistence finally won her over, and Elena decided to take her up on the offer. It wasn't much, just a small room at the back of the restaurant, but it was private, and it was a bed. Something as simple as a bed was all she needed after the hellish day she had been through. As she lay down on the mattress, she allowed herself to finally close her eyes, her body exhausted from everything, emotionally and physically. She drifted off into an uneasy sleep, but even in the stillness of the night, the questions, the uncertainty, and the fear were still there. What would happen when she woke up tomorrow? Would she be able to face the world again? Would she find a way to make it through this difficult time? Or would she be swallowed by the overwhelming feeling of failure and abandonment? At some point during the night, Elena woke up. The weight of everything was too much to bear, and she found herself sitting up in the bed, tears silently streaming down her face. It was a quiet breakdown, the kind that no one could hear but felt like it could drown her. But then, in the silence of the room, she realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. She had people like Teresa and Andres, strangers who had shown her more compassion than the ones she had called family. And as she wiped away the tears, she promised herself something important. She wouldn't give up. Not for herself, and not for the little life growing inside her. It wasn't going to be easy, but she could face whatever came next one step at a time. The next morning, Elena woke up to the soft sounds of the restaurant slowly coming to life. The clattering of dishes in the kitchen, the faint chatter of people in the background, and the smell of breakfast filled the air. For the first time in a long while, the usual bustle of a new day didn't seem to overwhelm her. Instead, it brought a sense of comfort, something familiar in the midst of everything that had happened. She lay in the small room Teresa had offered her the night before, still trying to adjust to the events of the previous day. It all seemed like a blur, like a dream she couldn't quite shake off. The pain from her parents' rejection, the overwhelming sense of abandonment, and the deep ache in her heart were still there. But for some reason that morning, they didn't feel as crushing as they had the night before. Teresa came into the room with a warm smile, carrying a tray with a plate of eggs and toast. Elena felt her stomach growl at the sight of the food, but the hunger was more of a reminder of how much she had endured rather than a true craving. She sat at the small table, trying to force herself to eat. Each bite felt heavy, like she was chewing through the weight of her emotions. As she sat there, her mind wandered back to the previous day, to the harsh words of her father, to the way her mother looked at her as though she were a stranger. It still didn't make sense. How could they treat her like that? They were her family. She had always tried to make them proud, always done what they expected of her, and yet, when she needed them most, they turned away as if her pregnancy was something to be ashamed of. The weight of the rejection was still hard to bear, but a small part of her began to ask herself why she was allowing it to define her. It was hard to believe, but she realized she didn't need their approval. She didn't need to live up to their expectations. There was a part of her buried deep inside that was beginning to believe that she could still make something of herself, even without their support. Maybe their rejection wasn't the end of the world. Maybe it was, in a twisted way, an opportunity to break free from their control and create a life for herself, on her own terms. She didn't know what the future would hold, but something inside her had started to shift. For the first time, she thought about what could be next, about the possibility of carving out a new path. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be many more challenges ahead. But as she sat there, taking in the warmth of the restaurant, surrounded by strangers who had already shown her more kindness than her own family, she felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could make it through this. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. Something better. She wasn't defined by the rejection of her family, by the things they had said. She had something they couldn't take away. Her own strength, her own resilience, and the unwavering love she already felt for the life growing inside her. As the days went by, Elena began to settle into a routine, though it felt strange at first. She spent her time at the small restaurant with Teresa, helping when she could, learning what she could about the world she was now part of. The work wasn't easy, but it gave her a sense of purpose, something she hadn't felt in a while. Teresa treated her like family, offering quiet words of encouragement whenever Elena felt like she was losing hope. Andres, the man who had helped her that rainy night, also checked in on her from time to time. He was kind, never pressing her for details about her past, but always offering his support in a way that felt genuine. And slowly, very slowly, Elena began to let her guard down. The world outside still seemed harsh and unyielding, but she started to realize that maybe there was kindness out there, even if it didn't come from the people she thought it would. She kept in touch with her old friend Camilla, who had reached out to her the night she was kicked out of her parents' house. Camilla offered her a place to stay, even though Elena hadn't yet been ready to take that step. Camilla never judged her, never made her feel like a failure. That kind of unconditional support was rare, and Elena treasured it even from afar. But despite all the kindness from the people around her, there was still one thing Elena couldn't shake off: her parents. She couldn't stop thinking about them, the way they had thrown her out, the coldness in their eyes. They hadn't tried to contact her, not even once. Every time she thought about calling them, about reaching out to see if they had changed their minds, she felt a wave of anger and hurt. The part of her that wanted their approval, their love, still lingered even after everything that had happened. But the more time passed, the more Elena realized something important. She didn't need their approval anymore. She had spent so much of her life trying to make them happy, trying to be the perfect daughter. But it had come at the expense of her own happiness. She had lost herself in their expectations, in their version of who she should be. Now, as she stood on her own 2 feet, facing the challenges of being a single mother, she realized that she could be her own person. She didn't need their validation to know she was worthy. Slowly, over time, she started to forgive herself for the mistakes she felt she had made, for the things she had done to try to please them. It was a painful process, and it wasn't easy, but with each passing day she felt lighter, and though she couldn't completely let go of the hurt they caused her, she knew she had to move forward. She had her daughter, and that was all that mattered. She wasn't alone anymore. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Elena received a call that she didn't expect. It was from Camilla, her old friend from school. At first, Elena wasn't sure if she should even answer, but something inside her told her to pick up the phone. Camilla's voice was warm and concerned as she told Elena that she had news. "I spoke with your parents," Camilla said gently. Elena felt her stomach drop. She didn't want to hear from them. After everything that had happened, she didn't know if she could handle the pain of hearing their voices again. But Camilla assured her that it wasn't like before. "They want to see you, Elena," she continued. "They've been asking about you, saying they regret what they did." Elena's heart raced. She couldn't believe it. After all this time, after all the hurt, they suddenly wanted to reach out. She felt a mix of emotions, anger, confusion, and even a tiny spark of hope. Why now? Why after everything? Part of her wanted to say no, to turn away from them just like they had turned away from her. But another part of her, a small voice that had been silenced for so long, told her to consider it. Maybe they had changed. Maybe they were finally ready to admit their mistake. Elena hesitated for a long time, torn between the pain of the past and the possibility of reconciliation. She spent the next few days wrestling with the decision. Could she really face them after all they had done? Was she ready to open that door again? She knew that seeing them again would bring back all the memories, the good ones, the bad ones, and the ones she wished she could forget. She couldn't deny that a part of her still wanted them in her life. She missed them, even though they had hurt her in ways she could never fully explain. They were her parents, after all, the people who had raised her, who had been there for her in other moments, before the rejection. And the thought of her daughter never knowing them, never having the chance to meet her grandparents weighed heavily on her heart. But no matter how much she wanted it, Elena knew one thing. She couldn't go back to the way things were. She couldn't let the past define her future. Her daughter, Valeria, was the one who mattered now. Valeria was her family. And whatever decision Elena made, it would have to be one that protected the life she was building with her, not the one that had torn her down. Elena finally decided to meet her parents. It was not something she did lightly, and as the day approached, her nerves became almost unbearable. Her heart raced at the thought of seeing them again, after all that had happened. She had no idea what to expect. Would they apologize? Would they try to make things right, or would it all be another round of painful rejection? She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she couldn't ignore the small voice inside her that told her to try. After all, her daughter deserved to have the opportunity to know her grandparents, even if it meant facing her own pain in the process. The day came, and she found herself standing outside their house once again, the house that had once been her home. The mansion, now quiet and cold, looked nothing like the place of warmth and laughter she remembered as a child. It was as if everything had changed, except for the memories that still haunted her. Her parents were standing at the door when she arrived, looking somewhat disoriented. almost as if they weren't sure what to expect either. Her father, the same man who had once yelled at her to leave, was standing there with a look of uncertainty in his eyes. Her mother, who had always been the one to offer comfort, was now standing with her arms crossed, a hint of sadness in her expression. Elena couldn't help but notice how much older they looked now, how much life had worn them down, just as it had worn her down. They were no longer the perfect, proud figures she remembered from her childhood. They, too, had been affected by the choices they made. Her father was the first to speak, his voice trembling with regret. "Elena, we've been thinking about what happened. We made a terrible mistake. We hurt you, and we're sorry." Elena felt her chest tighten at his words. Part of her wanted to run, to turn around and walk away from them, just like they had walked away from her. But another part of her, the part that wanted to believe that people could change, that healing was possible, told her to stay, to listen, to give them a chance. Her mother stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "We never should have pushed you away. I don't expect you to forgive us right away, but please know we're truly sorry for the pain we caused you." Elena's emotions were all over the place. She had waited so long for this moment, for an apology, for some sign that they understood what they had done to her. But even as they stood there acknowledging their mistakes, she couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same. They were still her parents, but they were also the people who had hurt her more than anyone else. Elena took a deep breath, trying to process everything. "I've been carrying this pain for so long," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't know if I can just forget what happened, but I'll try to move forward. For me. For Valeria." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment there was a silence that felt heavier than anything else. Then her father stepped forward and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "We'll do whatever it takes to make things right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've learned the hard way that nothing is more important than family." Elena didn't know if she could fully forgive them. She didn't know if she ever would, but as she stood there, with her parents finally showing some sign of remorse, she realized that, for the first time, they were finally acknowledging the depth of their mistakes. That alone was enough to begin the long, painful process of healing. And maybe, just maybe, it was a step toward rebuilding something with them, something new, something that wasn't tainted by the past. As the weeks passed, Elena started to allow herself to believe in the possibility of healing. The first time her parents came to visit, it was awkward. There were no immediate words of comfort or apologies, just the heavy silence that hung between them. But in the quiet of that first meeting, Elena noticed something. They were trying. They didn't come with excuses or demands, they simply came to be with her and her daughter. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Her father, once so cold, helped her fix a small leak in the roof. Her mother brought over some homemade food and stayed to talk for a little while. They were not the same people who had kicked her out that night. They were not perfect, but they were showing up. Slowly, she began to see the remorse in their actions. It wasn't easy for her to accept at first. After all the years of trying to earn their love and approval, after the rejection and hurt, it felt foreign to let them back in. But seeing them try, seeing the small changes in how they treated Valeria, how they treated her, made something inside her shift. Valeria was the key. For Elena, watching her parents bond with her daughter was like watching a new chapter unfold in a book she thought had ended. Valeria, so innocent and pure, didn't carry the burden of the past. She was a blank slate, and seeing the way her grandparents interacted with her, holding her, playing with her, showing her the love they had once withheld, gave Elena hope. Valeria, in her small way, had become a bridge between the pain of the past and the future Elena wasn't sure she could imagine. Every time her parents made an effort with her daughter, Elena's heart softened just a little more. They weren't just apologizing for what they had done to her, but they were showing her that they could be the kind of parents and grandparents they should have been all along. Still, Elena didn't let her guard down completely. There were moments when the past would rush back, when she would remember the night they'd thrown her out, the way they'd looked at her as though she were nothing. It wasn't something she could forget. no matter how hard she tried. But slowly, as they continued to visit and show their willingness to make amends, Elena realized that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting the hurt. It didn't mean erasing the past or pretending that it never happened. It meant accepting it for what it was, acknowledging the pain it caused and making a choice to move forward, not bound by the past, but free from it. This realization was freeing in itself. She didn't need to forgive them completely to move forward. She didn't need to erase the scars they had left. What mattered was that she was choosing her own path now. She was rebuilding her life with Valeria, with people who truly cared for her. The process of healing was still ongoing, but as she watched her parents hold Valeria, their smiles genuine, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this new beginning wasn't about erasing the old, but about embracing something better. Elena didn't need her parents' approval to be happy. She had learned that lesson the hard way, but seeing them try, seeing them love her daughter, gave her the space to start forgiving, not for them, but for herself. It was in those moments of quiet, when her daughter's laughter filled the room, that Elena realized she had already created the family she had always dreamed of. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in that reality she found strength, hope, and the understanding that no matter what, she was enough. Months passed, and with each day, Elena's life felt more stable, more grounded. Her relationship with her parents continued to evolve, though it was far from perfect. There were still days when the weight of the past would resurface, when the scars would remind her of the hurt they had caused. But with time, those moments became fewer, and she found herself focusing more on the present. Valeria was growing, becoming more curious about the world around her, and that for Elena was all that truly mattered. Her parents continued to visit regularly, and while their relationship was not what it once was, it was something new, something that had the potential to grow stronger with each passing day. They still made mistakes, but so did Elena. She had learned that healing wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up again and again, even when it was hard. And for the first time in a long time, Elena felt like she was truly showing up for herself, for Valeria, and for the future they were building together. One day, as they were all sitting together in her small apartment, Valeria climbed into her lap, her tiny hands reaching for Elena's face. She smiled up at her mother, and for a brief moment, Elena saw her own childhood reflected in her daughter's eyes. It was then that she realized that the love she had been searching for all her life wasn't something she had to earn or chase. It had always been right there, within her, within the family she had created, with the people who truly loved her. Her parents, while not perfect, had shown their willingness to change, and that, in itself, was enough for Elena to move forward. She wasn't the same person she was when she was kicked out of their house. The pain, the rejection, it still lingered in the background, but it no longer controlled her. She had a new sense of self, a new understanding of what it meant to forgive, not for others, but for herself. And as she looked at her daughter, at the life they were building together, she knew that no matter what the future held, she would be okay. The healing wasn't complete, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, Elena allowed herself to believe in the possibility of peace, of a life that wasn't defined by the past, but by the strength and love she had cultivated within herself. She had finally learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about moving forward, and she was ready to do just that.